obscure federal statute called the Material Witness Law, which basically says it's okay, arguably. And we're going to argue it. Joining me now to debate these issues, immigration attorney and former federal prosecutor Michael Wilds. He's also a councilman in Englewood, New Jersey. And immigration rights attorney Patrice Perilli. Thank you for being with us. Before we debate this, we got to know what the law says. So I've summarized it. We're going to put it up on the screen so our viewers can read along. It dates all the way back to 1984, the Material Witness Law. In essence, it says that a person may be arrested if his or her testimony is material, that's the key word, to a criminal proceeding, and that person is likely to flee. Now, this is interesting. The person may be held indefinitely. There's no limit. And the identities may be kept absolutely secret because they're connected to a grand jury, and grand jury proceedings are secret, even though some of these folks have never appeared before a grand jury over the course of more than a year. So, Michael, you're the former prosecutor. How in the world can this be justified?
We're fighting a war, and the rules have changed. The rules need to change because, frankly, Greg, the government found themselves very vulnerable and its citizens need to be protected. Our lives are at risk. The law in 1984 is being strained. There is no argument that they need better law and better tools. But there are safeguards. You have to have a judge. You're entitled to a hearing, enter a court-appointed attorney. We have agents in the field that are exposed if we don't keep these detainees under wraps. And ultimately, this war on terrorism has now taken so many fronts on so many different continents. We need time to vet all the information
through. But Michael, some of these guys have been behind bars for months. Some of them don't even have an attorney and haven't seen a judge. If they came knocking on your door and said, you know what, John Smith, the neighbor you barely know, thinks you're a material witness to terrorist activity, how would you like that?
Jose Padilla, Zacharias Moussaoui. Zacharias Moussaoui was the 20th hijacker. Mr. Padilla was rumored or proven, perhaps, to actually be the perpetrator of a dirty bomb on U.S. citizens. Right. These aren't people that are entitled to the same privileges. And the fact is, we are.
What if we added Michael Wilds to the list of Zacharias Moussaoui and Jose Padilla? Look, Patrice, you're troubled by this. Tell me why.
I'm very troubled by it. I really feel that the issue here is terrorism, not immigration. We're going after many innocent people here who are hardworking cab drivers. You know, they're not here to threaten our security. And yet we've destroyed their lives, often after holding them for 7 months. And immigration judges ordered them removed from the U.S. for a minor violation. They're being held.
Guys like Padilla and Moussaoui, there's solid evidence that they're terrorists, for goodness sakes.
They weren't held on material witness warrants.
Yes, they were. Initially, Moussaoui was arrested under a material witness warrant.
Well, then they did the right thing in the Moussaoui's case. They followed through with the procedure.
Maybe they're doing the right thing in all these cases.
But if they've had over a year to come up with some sort of evidence against these individuals, and then they ultimately release them back into the community or send them home.
Takes time to develop evidence, doesn't it, Michael?
It absolutely does. The information needs to be filtered properly. You know, it's a great disappointment, the American Muslim community, that they take homage to the fact that the government is trying to protect its citizenry, of which they play a major role, but a very quiet role.
But, you know, look, as lawyers, both of you, and I went to law school and practiced law for a while, you know you go back to the original intent of the law. You examine the intent behind the legislation, and you both know it. The intent behind this 1984 law, long before we thought about Al-Qaeda, was to compel testimony from frightened or reluctant witnesses. Now, Michael, that's not the intent of the law here, is it?
The intent of the law?
It's being bent.
Right now, we have a different playing field. We fight wars, usually with people with uniforms. Now we have terrorists that blow up civilians. We are now taking hair samples from these witnesses, fingerprints. Material witnesses don't have to only go to grand juries and courts. They provide all sorts of resourceful information, and our government, until they design a position of comfort or a law that comports with all of our judicial doctrines, we have to give them what tools they need. This is common sense.
Is the law being bent here?
It is absolutely being bent. And worse is the situation, these people, they have no access to counsel. We don't know where they're being held. We don't know who they are. We're at total unable to defend them.
Hey, sometimes we need to bend the law to protect American citizens, don't we?
But we don't want to really sell out our way of life. We have to definitely protect the democratic principles.
I want to bring up the
on.
case of Nabil al-Marab. This is interesting, and here's how the Washington Post put it. He's a former Boston cab driver from Kuwait. There you see it on the screen. Who was arrested 1 week after the attacks. He has been in custody 432 days, but has not appeared before a grand jury, even though law enforcement sources previously identified him as a material witness and a terrorism suspect. Michael, this guy was held in solitary confinement. Solitary for 8 months before even being given a lawyer and taken before a judge, much less a grand jury. Come on, help me here. That's wrong.
Greg, let's pull the lens back. I understand that this was a gentleman that had a name and a phone number of one of the attackers in his glove compartment and then did not give the information to the authorities, lied to them, had other information. The fact is, this whole process...
Give him a lawyer, for goodness sake.
Absolutely.
There is a
fundamental constitutional right.
There is a court-appointed attorney. In fact, in 1996, there was a removal court system that gave clearance to particular attorneys so that they can go into the process.
But then
that process was never convened for good reason, but has never been convened. No one's arguing.
Patrice?
Those aren't privileged even meetings between his attorney. All of those meetings with his attorney can be taped. They're monitoring all the communication they have with their attorney. That's not the attorney privilege.
I have no objection to the taping of interviews with attorneys or the protection of our citizens on our soil with the law being bent to that extent.
How about
we are
this?
in times of war, Greg.
20 of the 44 material witnesses being held in the United States, and those are only the ones we know about because it's secret.
Right.
But 20 of the 44 material witnesses being held have never testified before a grand jury. How can that be?
The 1984 law was predicated on grand jury and trial testimony, but the FBI has clearly made it a lot more flexible. Look, we have to be sensitive, but we don't have to be politically correct. We will be legally correct, but that will take time for Congress to catch up.
How about this? Patrice, 29 of the material witnesses have been released. Does that suggest to you it's been abused?
Absolutely, it has been abused. This is an opportunity to just go out there and search for any possible shred of information without any probable cause. These people are being detained in brutal conditions. There's reports that they're being beaten by the guards and the prison system.
Is it a violation of the Fifth Amendment due process? Let's put it on the screen. Fifth Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
But
violation, Patrice?
Absolutely a violation.
Wrong. Exception, Michael.
There's an exception for times of war. And if you're looking at the war on terrorism, that is not only getting the foot soldiers, but the governments and the organizations that support it. And these people need to be kept under lock and key until we can vet through their information. We protect our citizens, then we protect other legal
Patrice,
rights.
There are ways to protect our citizenship without destroying all the fundamental principles upon which our democracy is based. If we do this, they'll be coming for the immigrants today, and they'll be coming for us tomorrow.
I'm not so scared about that. I do believe that we have to remind ourselves of that, what we're trying to preserve. But are we going to argue? What about those 3,000 victims that aren't here today? And what kind of attacks are we looking forward to in the months and years to come if we don't give law enforcement the opportunity now to make up the vulnerability they put us in years ago?
Patrice, it does sound like a Fifth Amendment due process violation. We're all entitled to due process of the law. We get to go before a judge. They have to present the evidence against us. We get the opportunity to confront our accusers. But Abraham Lincoln gave us the precedent for this. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War. War is an exception to the Fifth Amendment, and we're at war, for goodness sakes.
We're technically not at war. There has not been a declaration of war.
There didn't have to be.
There really has to be to make the erosions against due process rights.
I got the Fifth Amendment here. It does not talk about a declaration of war. I'm looking at it right here.
Greg, Patrice, there are fundamental rights here. It is supervised by a judge. There is a court-appointed attorney, and you're entitled to a hearing. Whether or not you're going to be let out of jail is up to a court-appointed judge. A president appoints the federal judges. This separation of powers is the system that we have. And until Congress gets to the bottom of why we were exposed in the first place, we need to be flexible.
Michael
and
Patrice,
need to be vigilant of our rights, and that's what the courts are doing.
It's been an interesting debate. Michael Wiles, Patrice Pirelli, thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. Very interesting. Coming up, would you take your 22-year-old son to a brothel? We're going to tell you about one television show that intends to air that very experience. His mom took him there and waited for him when we come back.